Lecture 9, Part 4. We should be wrapping this one up, hopefully, on this video. So we've been talking about massive new industries in the 20s that are driving the economy like crazy. We did cars, we did radios, we did motion pictures. Okay, I'm doing something new here. I've never done this before. It's not in the notes. I'm calling an audible. I'm adding it in. Another new industry in the 20s. How about, you see in the slide will show, how about airplanes? Okay? So remember, the airplane had been invented by the Wright brothers here in the good old USA in, I think, 1903 was the first one. Very primitive, though. During World War I, the technology was becoming advanced enough it could be used as a weapon of war. Well, of course, a lot of people learned to fly during the war, and so it was seen as a potential market, for airplanes and stuff. And in the 20s, you start to see some rudimentary, passenger service. Okay, it becomes a bigger deal in the 30s, but in the 20s, you see a couple things. Air mail, you start seeing mail delivered by the air, which is much faster than sending it on a train. And you paid an extra premium for this if you were a businessman and needed to get documents from, say, California to New York as quickly as possible. You could send them airmail, pay a little extra fee. And then you start seeing the idea of some passenger service. So I just went and found this photo out on the internet. This is a Ford Tri-Motor because it has 3 motors. This is a built by the Ford Motor Company. Okay? This carries passengers. Not a lot. I didn't look it up. We're probably talking 12, certainly not more than 20. But you could buy a ticket and fly from one city to another much quicker than possibly on a train. And there's, of course, some places where a train doesn't go. Okay? And so in the 20s, this is another industry. It becomes, like I said, a bigger deal in the 30s. But think about it. You need airports. There's construction jobs again. Jobs making airplanes, jobs servicing airplanes, jobs flying airplanes. And so I'm not going to talk much more about this, but I thought I would insert this because I've been working on airplanes a lot the last 5 years, and so they were on my mind. I thought, well, I should tell you about them as well. Okay? So there's a fourth industry right there. All right. So things are going crazy. New technologies can drive a strong economy. The things I can think of that have happened, that might make more contemporary to you. You folks are old enough to, now everybody has a smartphone. But when I was your age, there were no cell phones. People didn't have cell phones until the 90s. Okay? A few rich people had them in the 80s, I suppose. Well, cell phones come out. Okay? Well, of course, now there's stores selling cell phones, cell phone accessories. Then, of course, you get the smartphones. Now there's money developing apps for smartphones. So this is a technology that can drive things. When I was in high school, there were no personal computers to speak of. We had none in the school. We had a terminal in one classroom that attached to a mainframe down at the ISD headquarters. And you could go in after school. I had a friend who was in the computer class and go to the printer because there was no monitor, and you could play Star Trek. Okay. The first really practical personal computers that came out were there was the Radio Shack TRS-80, and of course the famous one is the Apple II. My dad bought one of the first Apple IIs. It must have been about 1978, 79, 1980 at the latest, somewhere around there. I don't recall. It had 64K of memory built in. Wow. But you have this new tech now, and now computers are everywhere. Okay, and a whole new industry grows up around this new technology. So in the 20s, it's automobiles, radios, motion pictures, and airplanes. Okay? Lots of money being made. Let's go to the next slide. So, someone who's involved with this is Herbert Hoover. He's the Secretary of Commerce. Okay? And some of the things the government was doing at this time to help make the economy better. For one thing, they encourage organizations, companies to form trade associations. Okay? I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but a lot of people in a similar uh, industry might get together and cooperate to a certain extent. Now, we're still competitors, right? Okay. Now, remember, the Sherman Antitrust Act says restraint of trade can be illegal, but now the government's encouraging companies to cooperate to a certain extent. Okay. And they can come up with things to benefit everybody, even though they're in competition. Okay. Uh, I will give you just once again a contemporary example. I used to sell batteries when I worked at Sears, car batteries. Okay, there's not standardized sizes. Toyota batteries don't fit Hondas, and the Honda batteries don't fit Chevys, and Chevy batteries don't fit Fords. They all kind of have their unique sizes, but they all operate on 12 volts, 12-volt systems. Okay. Now, can you imagine how awkward it would be if Chevys operated on 13 volts and Chryslers operated on 11 volts and Fords operated on 15 volts? They would all need different batteries anyway, but think about the accessories. Headlights, radios, things that plug into the cigarette lighter. Okay? Those that would be madness. So at some point, somewhere, at some time, and don't ask me how or when this happened, but at some point, all the manufacturers kind of settled on a voltage that they could coordinate on, which is 12 volts. Now, back a long time ago, like in the 20s, originally it was 6 volts, but then they added more things to cars. They eventually upgraded the systems. Okay, this is the kind of thing a trade association might do. Okay, some cooperation that could benefit everybody. Okay, and so the government's, the Secretary of Commerce is encouraging companies to start these kind of things. Okay, and cooperate where they can. And this is just an example of how things might work. Now, another example of how people are all wrapped up in business involves a book, and this is the Business Creed. Okay. Now, there's a book here, and I was going to read part of it, like a little excerpt from it to you, but the cat has come down and laid down on my papers. If I try to move her, she will shred my hand. So let me just tell you the gist. The book is called, it's The Man Nobody Knows. All right. So who do you think this book would be about if it's The Man Nobody Knows? It's written by Bruce Barton, by voice. Let me see if I have a picture of Bruce. There's Bruce Barton. The Man Who Nobody Knows. I've actually seen this book. It's on my list of books I might want to read someday because it ties in with the class. The book that nobody knows, I'm sorry, The Man Nobody Knows is a book about the life of Jesus. What? Okay. Well, believe in him or not, I think most people have heard of Jesus. Okay. What Bruce Barton does is he looks at it from a business standpoint. Okay. Basically, his argument is that Jesus is the ultimate startup. Okay, he starts with nothing, picks 12 disciples, trains them in what needs to be done, and sends them out to conquer the world. Okay? All right. But it starts off as a grassroots operation. Okay? Also, as part of his book, he argues that advertising men should study the parables of Jesus because they're short, sweet, to the point. All right, you don't have a lot of time in an ad; people lose interest and tune out. Somebody once said, I think it was Henry Ford, if I recall, said that 50% of the money he spent on advertising was wasted. The trouble is, he couldn't figure out which 50% it was, or he would have canceled that part. Right? So people are very, very getting into business around this time. Okay, Calvin Coolidge, if I recall, said, I believe it was him who said this: the business of America is business. Okay? Hey, the English do banking, the French cook, the Italians do art. Okay, but Americans do business. We get up, we go to work, we make some money, we invent things. That's what we do. And so that's how business-oriented his climate is in the 1920s. Like I said, the government is doing everything it can to encourage businesses to grow and to succeed, because if they're doing well, then they hire people. Okay, one way to banish poverty is to, you know, get rid of unemployment. All right. So, in 1928, the Republicans run Herbert Hoover for president. Secretary of Commerce running for president. You wouldn't see that nowadays, probably. Okay. Here's the results. Big win. Look at that. Even breaks into the solid South. Look, Florida and Texas go Republican. That just doesn't happen. Okay. So Hoover wins really, really big time. Okay. Largely based on the strong economy that the Republicans have been running for 8 years. Okay. People want more of that. His opponent is a guy named Al Smith. And that name is probably buried behind the little box here. It has me on it. Al Smith had possibly a couple of problems. One, he was going up against the Republican policies of the 20s. He was also from New York City, if I recall, and he kind of spoke with a heavy New York accent. And by now we're starting to broadcast on radios, and to a lot of people in other parts of the country, it probably sounded weird, like there's one of those strange New Yorkers. Another problem Smith might have had counting against him is he was Catholic. Now, there's nothing wrong with being Catholic, but at this time, we had never had a Catholic president. And there were some people who were afraid that if we had a Catholic president, that he would take orders from the Pope. Okay? And so Hoover wins big time. Now, the final slide is slide D. I'm almost running out of time here on how long these videos can be. Let's talk about some of the weaknesses in the era. Let me just kind of blow through this. Agriculture is still doing poorly. Farmers always are struggling. Okay, I timed out there for a second. Looks like it zoned out. Like it overloaded. Let me just recap. Maybe it didn't get recorded. Farmers are struggling. Some people also say that there's an overconcentration of wealth, and there's always going to be people who have more money and people with less money. But some people say, and you can agree or disagree with this, it's an ideological thing, that there's too much wealth concentrated in too few people. For the economy to keep moving, you need everyone to have money they can spend. All right. That's a big philosophical argument. We won't go into that. I do want to get this one quote in here before this thing runs out. Here's a quote from Hoover when he's being nominated to run for president. There's a man who nobody knows. Here it is. This is from Hoover. We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. The poorhouse is vanishing from among us. You can read the rest. Okay, he says this during the campaign of 1928. Does anybody know what's kind of ironic about this? What's coming down the pike? Well, that's lecture 10. So have a good day, and we'll see you in Canvas.